The microphone was right there in front of him, heavy, silver, trembling just slightly in his grip. 43,000 people inside Citizens Bank Park were on their feet, screaming his name. Fireworks were going off somewhere beyond the left field wall. Confetti rained down in red and white ribbons from the upper deck. Jordan Walker had just won the 2026 Home Run Derby, the first Cardinal in franchise history to do it. A 4-year-old from Memphis, Tennessee, standing at the center of the baseball universe. And the entire country was watching to hear him celebrate. He didn't celebrate. He leaned into the microphone, and the stadium, all of it, the noise, the energy, the manufactured chaos of a midsummer night in Philadelphia, went quiet. "I want to talk about something," he said, voice steady. No tremor, no performance. That silence. 43,000 people, and you could have heard a paper cup hit the concrete. The ESPN broadcast cut to close-up. The color commentator stopped mid-sentence. A producer somewhere in a control truck said something nobody could make out, because the whole country was listening to a 4-year-old outfielder with a Louisville Slugger in one hand and a microphone in the other, about to say something that hadn't been said on that stage, in that moment, in a very long time. What happened next was not what anyone expected. What happened next was the kind of thing that doesn't get forgotten. But to understand why Jordan Walker said what he said, you have to understand where he came from. And that means going back, all the way back to a street corner in South Memphis, where a grandfather and his grandson used to sit on a plastic cooler and watch the Cardinals games on a 12-inch television. They'd run extension cord out to the porch to watch. Because Jordan Walker didn't become who he is at Citizens Bank Park, he became who he is on that porch. South Memphis, in the early 2000s, was a neighborhood that the rest of the city had mostly stopped thinking about. Not the worst block you'd ever seen, but not a block anybody was writing magazine articles about either. Corner stores with bulletproof glass at the registers, a recreation center that closed for budget reasons when Jordan was 4 and never reopened, cracked sidewalks, long summers, the smell of cut grass mixed with something fried from somebody's kitchen every single evening around 6. That was the neighborhood. That was the backdrop. Ronald Walker, Jordan's grandfather, had lived on that street for 41 years. He'd worked the loading docks at a freight company his entire adult life, bad knees and all, until they retired him with a handshake and a card signed by 12 co-workers. He was a short man, maybe 5 to 8, wide in the shoulders, with enormous hands that could palm a basketball, but had chosen, at some point in the 1970s, to wrap themselves around a baseball instead. Ronald Walker loved baseball the way some people love a religion. Not casually, not as a hobby. The way you love something that explained the world to you when the world was still very confusing. He had grown up watching the Cardinals. And not just watching, he had grown up watching them during an era when the Cardinals were one of the most integrated franchises in the game. When black players carried the team's identity on their backs, when names like Bob Gibson and Curt and Lou Brock weren't just athletes, but were something closer to proof. Proof that a black man's excellence was undeniable. Proof that the field was a place where performance was the only argument that mattered. Ronald talked about Bob Gibson the way a preacher talks about the scripture. Gibson, who threw so hard and so mean that batters used to step out of the box just to breathe. Gibson, who once pitched a complete game with a broken leg, kept throwing, kept competing, kept the Cardinals in the game until the X-ray confirmed what everyone else had refused to believe, 12. A number so statistically impossible that Major League Baseball changed the mound height the following year because they were afraid of what Gibson was doing to hitting. They changed the rules, Ronald told Jordan once, sitting on that porch with a sweating glass of sweet tea, the Cardinals game flickering on the extension cord television. Because one black man was too good. Jordan was 7 years old when he heard that for the first time. He didn't fully understand it, but he remembered it. The way kids remember the things that don't quite make sense yet, storing them somewhere for later, waiting for the day when the understanding catches up. Jordan's mother, Denise, worked double shifts at a hospital 2 days a week as a nursing aide and single-shifted the rest. She was a compact, serious woman with a quick laugh she didn't use often enough, who had raised Jordan mostly alone after his father left when Jordan was 3. She wasn't absent, far from it, but she was tired, the specific kind of tired that settles into a person's shoulders after years of doing everything by themselves. Ronald stepped in without being asked. He picked Jordan up from school. He made dinner on the double-shift nights. What Jordan had was this: fast hands and absolutely no fear. Ronald threw underhand the first year, sidearm the second, and overhand by the time Jordan was 8. By 9, Jordan was hitting anything Ronald could throw. By 10, Ronald had recruited a friend from the freight company to pitch to the boy because his own shoulder was giving out, and he didn't want Jordan to develop bad habits swinging at slow stuff. "He's something," the friend said one afternoon, watching a 10-year-old Jordan crack a ball that flew past the chain-link fence and into the parking lot of the recreation centre that no longer existed. What Ronald also knew, what he kept to himself for a while, was that something was changing in the game he loved. Something quiet, gradual, the kind of change that doesn't announce itself. It just shows up one day when you look around and realize the landscape has shifted. In 1981, when Ronald was a young man, black players made up nearly 19% of Major League Baseball's rosters. Not a majority, but a real, substantial presence. You looked out on a field and saw a genuine cross-section of America. You watched the Cardinals and saw Bob Forsch, and you saw Ozzie Smith, and you saw Ted Simmons, and the team felt like it belonged to everyone. Like the game belonged to everyone. By the time Jordan was born in 2002, that number had dropped to 8%. By the time Jordan was in high school, it had dropped below 7%. Ronald watched that decline the way a man watches a slow flood. There was nothing dramatic about it. No single moment to point to. Just a gradual recession year after year, and with each year fewer and fewer kids who looked like Jordan picking up a bat, choosing basketball instead, choosing football instead, gravitating toward the sports that had visible, celebrated, omnipresent black superstar culture, LeBron James and Kevin Durant, on every billboard, Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson on every commercial, the NFL and the NBA so deeply woven into the fabric of black youth culture that the idea of choosing baseball felt, to some kids, almost eccentric. Ronald understood it. He wasn't naive about it. The economics were real. Baseball required equipment, consistent field access, organized league infrastructure, a support system that didn't come cheap. And baseball's pipeline into black communities had quietly been dismantled over decades, through the closure of recreation centers and the defunding of youth leagues, through the disappearance of the neighborhood coaches who used to spend their Saturdays hitting grounders to kids in parking lots. But Ronald also believed, with the conviction of a man who had sat with this thought for 50 years, that something else was being lost alongside the statistics. Something harder to measure, the history, the lineage. The thread that connected a 12-year-old in South Memphis to Curt, who in 1969 refused to accept a trade to Philadelphia, challenged the reserve clause that bound players to their teams like indentured servants, lost his career for it, lost 3 of the best years he would have played, but won the right for every baseball player who came after him to be treated as a human being with choices. That story, that sacrifice, that man. Ronald wanted Jordan to know he was part of something. That picking up a baseball wasn't a random choice or a quirky hobby. It was an inheritance. He told Jordan about Flood when Jordan was 11. He sat him down at the kitchen table, same table where homework got done, same table where dinners got eaten, and he told him the whole story. The trade, the letter to Commissioner Bowie Kuhn, the lawsuit, the years in exile, the congressional testimony, the fact that Flood never got to play in the World Series again, never got the rings his talent deserved, because he stood up and said that the system was wrong. Jordan listened to the whole thing without moving. So he gave up his career, Jordan said when Ronald finished. Jordan sat with that. Ronald thought about it for a moment. I think he knew what he was doing. That conversation stayed with Jordan for 13 years. In ways he didn't fully recognize until he was standing in front of a microphone in Philadelphia, it shaped everything about the person he was becoming. Jordan Walker played baseball at Whitehaven High School in Memphis, where he was, by any honest measure, the most gifted athlete in the building. He was also one of maybe a dozen black kids playing on the team in a school where the student body was predominantly black. That fact was not lost on him. It bothered him in ways he didn't have the vocabulary to articulate yet, but the feeling was there, this sense that something wasn't adding up, that the sport he loved had somehow stopped feeling like it belonged to kids who looked like him. He talked about it once, his junior year, with his coach, a white man named Dale Hutchins, who had been coaching high school baseball for 22 years and had a way of listening to a player that made you feel like what you were saying mattered. Hutchins was quiet for a moment. He was winding up an extension cord behind the batting cage. He kept winding. "Tell me more about what you mean," he said. "I mean in this neighborhood," Jordan said. "In this school, everybody plays ball and football. Nobody plays this. And when I go to tournaments, the other teams look I don't know." Hutchins stopped winding. He set the cord down. He looked at Jordan directly, the way teachers and coaches look at you when they've stopped performing and started being honest. "You're right," he said, "and the people who run this game haven't done nearly enough to fix it. But I'll tell you what I know, Jordan. The kids in this neighborhood aren't playing baseball because nobody's showing them what it looks like when someone from here makes it. You play well enough?" Jordan was 17 years old when his coach said that to him. He went home that evening, sat on the porch with his grandfather, and watched the Cardinals beat the Cubs 4-2 on the extension cord television. It was a cool night for August in Memphis, a breeze coming off the river somewhere, the cicadas going full volume in the oak tree in the next yard. Ronald didn't look away from the screen. He just nodded, slow and certain, the way a man nods when he has known something for a long time and is simply waiting for the other person to catch up. "I know," he said. "The Cardinals drafted Jordan Walker in the first round in 2020, 21st overall pick. He was 18 years old. The work, right. Baseball people talk about the work the way other people talk about breathing. It's not something you celebrate, it's something you do continuously before the sun comes up and after it goes down, and in the small, unglamorous hours in between when nobody is watching and the stadium is empty and you're in a batting cage somewhere, hitting off a machine with a bucket of balls and a blister on your left hand that you've been taping over for 3 days. Jordan did the work. He moved through the minor leagues with the focused, unhurried energy of a person who has already made peace with being patient. AA, AAA, September call-ups. He wasn't flashy about it. He didn't have a brand in those years. He didn't have a media presence. He had a batting eye that scouts described as freakish, and a right field arm that could cut down a runner at third from the warning track with a throw that arrived on a rope. Low, fast, perfect. He made his full debut with the Cardinals in 2023 at 21 years old. By 2025, he was an all-star. 301 average, 31 home runs through the first half of the season, a swing that analysts spent whole broadcast segments trying to break down, that long extension through the hitting zone, that quiet load, and then the eruption. A swing that looked effortless and generated exit velocities that were anything but. He was selected to represent the Cardinals at the Home Run Derby in Philadelphia. July 2026. Citizens Bank Park. For the first time in franchise history, Now, before we go any further, I want to stop here for a second, because I need you to understand something about what it means to represent a franchise like the Cardinals as a black player in 2026. This is the team of Curt Flood, the team of Bob Gibson, the team of Lou Brock, who stole 118 bases in a single season and laughed while he did it. These are legends. These are men who carried more than box scores when they played. They carried the weight of what it meant to be excellent and black in America during eras when those two things were being openly contested. And now this 4-year-old from South Memphis is walking into a competition at Citizens Bank Park carrying that same uniform, that same bird on the bat, and nobody in the broadcast booth seems to be thinking about any of that. Nobody except Jordan. The derby format was standard. 8 competitors, head-to-head bracket, timed rounds, each batter having 4 minutes to hit as many home runs as possible. Jordan's first-round opponent was a shortstop from the Yankees who had hit 42 home runs in the previous season and had arms that looked like they belonged on a different species. Nobody thought Jordan would beat him. The betting lines didn't think it. The broadcast team was already laying the groundwork for the narrative they expected to tell the slugger against the contact hitter, the raw power against the refined skill. Jordan hit 19 home runs in 4 minutes in the first round. The crowd, a Philadelphia crowd, a crowd that belongs to no team and owed Jordan Walker nothing, started making noise on the 14th. By the 17th, people were on their feet. The 19th landed 8 rows deep in left centre field, and the stadium shook like something had shifted in the earth beneath it. The Yankees' shortstop hit 14. Good round. Not enough. Jordan walked calmly back to the dugout, took a drink of water, sat down, and said nothing. His batting coach, a heavy-set man from the Dominican Republic named Elio Vargas, sat beside him and put a hand on his shoulder. Elio asked. "Good," Jordan said. There was more. The semi-final against the first baseman from the Braves. 22 home runs. One of them cleared the manual scoreboard in right field, something that had happened twice in the park's history. The crowd was chanting something. It took the broadcast team a moment to pick it out. A Philadelphia crowd for a Cardinals player in the middle of July. That's how good the round was. The final against Marcus Delaney, the Cubs' massive cleanup hitter from Atlanta, who was 6'4", 238 pounds, and had led the National League in home runs in each of the past 2 seasons. Delaney was everything the home run derby was theoretically supposed to celebrate. Pure, enormous, theatrical power. He had a first-round total of 26 home runs and an uppercut swing that sent balls to altitudes that seemed structurally questionable. Jordan stood in the batter's box for the final round and looked out at the park. It was twilight. The sky above left field was going from orange to deep blue. The lights were on. The crowd was at a volume that you could feel in your sternum. He took a slow breath. He thought about his grandfather, not as a tactic, not consciously. He just thought about him, the porch, the extension cord, the plastic cooler, the Cardinals game on the 12-inch television, the way Ronald used to describe Bob Gibson's wind-up like he was describing something sacred. He thought about the table where he heard the story of Curt Flood. He thought about what it meant to be standing here, in this uniform, at this moment, doing something that no Cardinal before him had ever done. The first swing of the final round connected on something pure. The ball left the bat and climbed and landed somewhere in the upper deck in left field, row 7, with a crack that the microphones caught clearly, even over 43,000 people making noise. Jordan hit 24 home runs in the final round. Delaney hit 21. The celebration was immediate. The field filled with confetti. The home run music, a custom track the derby uses when a winner is declared, pulsed through the speakers. A production crew materialized out of nowhere to hand Jordan the large, illuminated derby trophy a silver sphere on a pedestal that looked like it had been designed by someone who had never seen baseball but had definitely watched too many science fiction movies. Jordan held the trophy. He smiled. He shook hands with Delaney, who was genuinely gracious, and said something directly into Jordan's ear that made Jordan nod slowly and seriously. Later, a reporter would ask what Delaney said. Jordan declined to share. Then the production coordinator, a young woman with a headset and a clipboard, handed Jordan the microphone. Standard procedure. The winner says a few words. Thanks the sponsors, thanks the fans, thanks the host city. Maybe a joke, maybe a shout-out to the family. 30 to 60 seconds of gracious, marketable gratitude, and then everybody goes home and the trophy gets packed up and baseball moves on to the next story. Jordan took the microphone. He looked out at the stands. The crowd was still going, but there's a particular kind of moment, and anyone who has ever been in a large crowd knows this moment, where the energy shifts slightly and everyone realizes, all at once, that something different is about to happen. The applause thinned. 43,000 people landed, all at roughly the same second, in a kind of collective attention. "I want to thank the fans here in Philadelphia," Jordan said. "I want to thank my Cardinals family, my coaching staff, my teammates." A pause, short, deliberate, "and I want to thank my grandfather, Ronald Walker, 84 years old, Memphis, Tennessee. Man who taught me how to hold a bat when I was 5 years old, who told me about Bob Gibson and Curt and Lou Brock, who made sure I understood that I was part of something when I picked up this game." He stopped again. Something shifted in his face, still composed, but different. "I want to say one more thing." The crowd was almost completely quiet now. The production coordinator with the clipboard was looking at her watch, and then at her supervisor, and then at the crowd, and then back at her watch, doing the math on how far off script this was already getting. There are fewer black players in Major League Baseball today than there have been in the last 50 years. I'm not saying that to make anybody feel bad. I'm saying it because it's true, and it's something I think about all the time. In 1981, roughly 1 in 5 players in this league was black. Today, it's less than 1 in 15, and the number keeps going down. And what that really means, is that there are kids out there right now, in neighborhoods like the one I grew up in, who don't see themselves when they look at this game, who look at baseball and feel like it wasn't built for them, and I understand that feeling. He shifted his weight. His voice didn't shake, but it had weight to it now, the kind of weight that comes from saying out loud the thing you've been carrying quietly for a long time. Bob Gibson was from Omaha, Nebraska. Curt grew up in Oakland, California. They didn't look at the game and see something that wasn't meant for them. They looked at it and decided to take it. And because they took it, because they played it at the highest level and carried it with their whole being, kids like my grandfather fell in love with this sport. And my grandfather sat on a porch in South Memphis and put a bat in my hands and told me I was part of that line. He looked at the trophy for a moment, then back up. I need the kids in our neighborhoods to know that line is still there, that this game still belongs to us, that there is still a bat waiting for whoever wants to pick it up. I want a kid watching this tonight in Memphis or Detroit or the south side of Chicago or southwest Atlanta to see this and think, maybe, just maybe, not basketball, not football, a long pause. Because when it was our game, it was great, and it can be that way again. He lowered the microphone. The silence held for 1 full second, maybe 2. Then the stadium came apart. Not polite applause, not the obligatory ovation that follows a winner's speech. Something rawer than that. Something that started in the lower sections and moved upward and outward until the whole park was in it, a standing, sustained, building noise that the broadcast producers would later describe as the loudest non-game reaction in Derby history. People who had come to watch home runs were on their feet for something else entirely. Phones were everywhere, red recording lights blinking across the whole lower deck like a constellation. The broadcast team, to their credit, stayed quiet. For 12 seconds after Jordan stopped speaking, neither commentator said a word. Later, one of them would say in an interview that he just didn't know what to add, that the silence felt more appropriate than anything he could have said. And somewhere in Memphis, Tennessee, in a small living room on a street he'd lived on for 41 years, an 84-year-old man named Ronald Walker sat in his recliner, not a porch anymore. His knees had gotten too bad for the porch in winter, so his daughter had moved the television inside and watched his grandson say all of it, and pressed both of his enormous hands flat against his knees and didn't try to stop the tears that came. You know, I've been sitting with this story for a while now, and what keeps getting to me is not the home run derby. The derby is spectacular, don't get me wrong. 24 home runs in a final round is the kind of thing that lives in your memory. But what actually hits hardest is the image of an 84-year-old man in Memphis watching his grandson choose to use the biggest microphone he's ever been handed to say something true instead of something safe. That choice. That's the thing. The immediate reaction to Jordan's speech was enormous. The clip, just the speech portion, 2 minutes and 17 seconds, had 6 million views on social media by midnight. By the following afternoon, it was past 20 million. By the end of the week, it had been shown on every major sports network, dissected in newspaper columns from Los Angeles to Atlanta, cited by elected officials, read into the congressional record by a representative from Georgia who had played Little League as a child and remembered when the game felt different. But the reactions weren't uniformly positive. That would be too simple. There were voices who said Jordan should have kept baseball and politics separate, that the derby wasn't the place, that nobody wanted a sociology lesson in the middle of a home run competition. A columnist for a prominent sports magazine wrote a piece with the headline, "Walker's speech was self-righteous, not inspiring," which generated its own counter-reaction, its own conversation, its own firestorm of letters to the editor. Former players weighed in. Active players weighed in. Coaches and executives weighed in. A retired Hall of Fame outfielder who had been one of a handful of prominent black stars in the sport during the 1990s appeared on a morning show and said, with genuine emotion, "I wish I had said that." The Commissioner of Baseball issued a statement praising Jordan's passion for the game and its history, and reaffirming the league's commitment to diversity initiatives that, critics were quick to note, had been in place for years without producing meaningful results in the numbers. Jordan said nothing publicly for 4 days after the derby. He went back to Street Louis, back to his routine, back to his preparation for the second half of the season. When he did speak, it was in a single, brief interview with a journalist from a Street Louis community newspaper, not ESPN, not The Athletic, not the Post-Dispatch, but a paper called the Street Louis American, the city's black-owned weekly which had been publishing since 1928. "I said what I said because I meant it," he told the journalist, a woman named Carla Henderson, who had been covering the city's black community for 20 years. "I wasn't trying to make anybody uncomfortable." Carla Henderson wrote the piece, long and careful and without embellishment, and it ran on the front page with a photograph of Jordan and his grandfather side by side, a photograph taken by Denise Walker on a phone camera, Ronald in his recliner, Jordan kneeling beside him. Both of them looking at the camera with the same calm, certain eyes. The response to that interview, in that paper, in that community, was different from everything else that had been written. Different in the way that mattered. Letters to the editor came in from fathers who had played catch with their sons the day after the speech, from mothers who had registered their daughters for Little League camps, from youth coaches in North City who said their inquiry calls had doubled since Derby night, from a 70-year-old man who wrote in careful, measured handwriting, "I played in the Cardinals farm system in 1974. I never made it." That letter was the one Jordan kept. He asked Carla Henderson for a copy of it. She sent him a photograph of the original, handwriting and all. He framed it. Now, none of this is to say that a single speech fixed anything. It didn't. The structural problems that had pulled black players away from baseball over 5 decades, the economics, the infrastructure gaps, the cultural drift, the collapse of inner-city youth programs, those problems don't resolve themselves because a talented outfielder said the right thing at the right moment on live television. Anyone who claimed otherwise was not paying attention to how deeply those problems run. But something did happen. And it happened quietly, in the way that things often actually happen, not with announcements or press releases, but with small, specific actions taken by individuals who were moved and decided to do something about it. A man named Deshaun Garrett in Memphis, Tennessee, who had played ball at the college level in the 1990s and then left the game to run a landscaping company, watched Jordan's speech and thought about the vacant lot 2 blocks from his house that had been sitting empty since the early 2000s. He made some calls. He had some money set aside. He knew a guy in the city parks department. 6 weeks after Derby night, construction began on a youth baseball field in South Memphis, 6 blocks from the street where Jordan Walker had grown up. Deshaun named it the Ronald Walker Field. He did not ask Jordan's permission. He just did it, and then called Jordan's mother, who told Jordan, who went silent on the phone for a long time. Denise said, "Yeah," Jordan said. He flew home on his next off day. He stood on the infield dirt of the field still under construction, the outfield not yet seeded, the backstop not yet installed, and he stood there for a while in the afternoon sun, not saying anything, just standing there. Then he called his grandfather and described it to him over the phone, detail by detail, what the dimensions were, where the dugouts would be, the fact that they were putting in lights so kids could practice in the evening when school let out. Ronald listened to all of it without interrupting. Jordan laughed. "I don't know, Grandad." "Cardinal red," Ronald said, without hesitation. "They were painted cardinal red. In Chicago, a non-profit called Field of 60, named for the percentage of black players lost from baseball since the 1980s, had been working quietly for 3 years on a program to bring baseball equipment and coaching into schools on the South Side. Their fundraising had been, by their own admission, modest. After Derby night, their donation page received $400,000 in 72 hours. They had to hire 2 new staff members to handle the logistics. Jordan sent a check himself, privately, without announcing it. The organization's director found out 2 months later, when the check cleared and someone recognized the name. In Atlanta, a 12-year-old named Marcus, who had been playing basketball since he could walk, watched the derby on his grandmother's television and saw a 2 4-year-old black man hit baseballs into the upper deck of a major league stadium and then say, calmly and clearly, that this game still belongs to us. Marcus had never held a baseball bat. The next day he asked his grandmother if they could go find one. They went to a sporting goods store. She bought him a bat for $32. He didn't have a field to use it on, but he took it to the park and found a wall and swung it against the air for an hour. Then he went home and watched videos of Jordan Walker's swing on his phone until the battery died. These stories didn't make headlines. They were just life, happening in the unobserved spaces where most actual change occurs. Meanwhile, something else was happening that nobody outside of a specific set of offices in New York City knew about yet. It would become public knowledge later, in the fall, when the announcement was made at a joint press conference between Major League Baseball and 3 major corporate sponsors. But the conversations had actually started the week after the Derby, in a conference room in Midtown Manhattan where several people with significant institutional power had watched Jordan's speech and then sat around a table and asked a question that should probably have been asked a decade earlier. What would it actually take? Not in theory, not in a mission statement. In practice, right now, this year, what would it take to build a real pipeline? The result was the Black Baseball Initiative, a 10-year, $300 million commitment to fund youth baseball programs specifically in underserved urban communities, to create high school academies in 15 cities, to establish paid coaching positions in neighborhoods where volunteer structures had collapsed, to provide equipment free of charge to any child who wanted to play and whose family couldn't afford it. Jordan Walker was named one of 5 honorary ambassadors to the initiative. The others were 3 Hall of Famers and a former commissioner of baseball. Jordan was the youngest person in the room at the announcement press conference by 26 years. A reporter asked him afterward whether he felt pressure, whether the speech had set expectations that were going to be difficult to live up to. Jordan thought about it for a moment. He thought about the handwritten letter from the man who had played in the Cardinals farm system in 1974. He thought about Deshaun Garrett and the Cardinal red dugouts in South Memphis. He thought about Marcus in Atlanta and his $32 bat. "No," he said, "I feel like I'm carrying something that was always worth carrying." The Cardinals finished that season with 91 wins, narrowly missing the division title, losing to the Brewers by 2 games on the final day of the regular season. 298 for the full year, with 38 home runs, finished 3rd in NL MVP voting, and won his first Gold Glove Award for his defense in right field. None of those numbers, impressive as they are the thing people talked about when his season was discussed. The thing people talked about was the speech. The 2 minutes and 17 seconds in Philadelphia under the lights when a 4-year-old outfielder decided to use the home run trophy as a platform for something bigger than home runs. That fall, Ronald Walker's health declined. His knees had been bad for years. But in October, he developed a respiratory issue that the doctors weren't immediately sure about, and he spent 2 weeks in a hospital in Memphis that had a view of the river if you stood at a particular angle by the window. Jordan flew home and spent most of that time there. He slept in a chair in the hallway more than once. He was there one evening when Ronald, somewhat improved, somewhat back to himself, asked the nurse to turn on a baseball game. It was the postseason. The Cardinals weren't in it that year, but some games were still being played, and the nurse found the channel and set the volume at a level Ronald could hear without straining. They watched together for a while, grandfather and grandson. The same thing they had done on that porch in South Memphis for 19 years, give or take the porch, the extension cord, the plastic cooler, and the river view that you could only see if you stood at a particular angle, Ronald said. Curt Flood. I keep thinking about how he never got to see it work out. He gave up what he gave up, and then he didn't get to see the game be better for it. He died before. Ronald paused, adjusted himself in the bed. Jordan looked at his grandfather. Ronald said, "Yeah," Jordan said. "You said your thing," Ronald said. "And the field is going to get built, and the kids are going to come, and the program is going to run, and you're going to spend 20 years playing this game and then 20 more talking about it. And you're going to see it. The thing you said out loud, you're going to see it actually happen. Not all of it." He stopped. He looked at the television for a moment. Someone had just hit a double into the left field corner. The announcer made a noise about it. "Flood didn't get that," Ronald said quietly, "but you will. And you're going to carry him when you do." Jordan Walker, 24 years old, home run derby champion, first Cardinal in franchise history to win it, one of the best hitters in the National League, a man who had stood in front of 43,000 people and said something true, sat in a hospital chair in Memphis with his hands in front of him and said, "Yes, sir." Ronald was discharged from the hospital 3 weeks later. He went home to the house with the television and the photo of Irene from the porch, and the Cardinal read everything, because some things don't change when you've loved them for 50 years. And on a Tuesday evening in November, when the baseball season was fully over and the awards had been given out and the narratives of the year had been settled, Jordan drove out to South Memphis to see the field. The construction was complete. The lights were on, they were testing the system, making sure everything worked before the grand opening in the spring. The grass was in, the backstop was standing, the dugouts, painted Cardinal red, were empty and waiting. He stood on the pitcher's mound for a while. Just stood there, like he'd stood on that infield back when it was still dirt and possibility. The field was lit up bright against the November dark, and from where he stood the whole diamond was visible, the bases, the warning track, the outfield wall where someone had painted, in white letters against the red paint, the names Gibson, Flood, Brock, and underneath those names, smaller but clear, the name of the field itself, Ronald Walker Field. He stood there for a long time, not doing anything, just being there, in the place his grandfather's name was attached to, in the neighborhood where the whole story started, on a baseball field that hadn't existed 3 months ago and now existed because a 4-year-old used a microphone the right way. He was going to be back in the spring. He'd already committed to it. He was going to be here for the opening weekend, going to throw batting practice to whatever kids showed up, going to sign baseballs and shake hands and do all of the things that athletes do when they show up for community events. But that was spring. This was now, and this was just for him. He reached down and picked up a handful of the infield dirt, let it fall through his fingers, the same gesture his grandfather had made on baseball fields for 60 years. Something passed between the past and the present in that moment, the way things sometimes do when you're standing in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. Jordan Walker walked off the field, got in his car, and drove to his grandfather's house. Denise was already there. She had made dinner. Ronald was in his recliner, with the television on, the evening news, the sound low. He looked up when Jordan came in. Ronald said. Jordan sat down on the couch. He thought about the lights, the red dugouts, the names on the wall, the dirt, the whole thing lit up against the Memphis night. "It looks like it's been there forever," he said. Ronald nodded. He turned back to the television. Jordan's mother set a plate in front of him without being asked. They ate dinner together, the three of them, the way they always had. The same table, the same kitchen, the same family. Outside, somewhere across the city, on a street 6 blocks east, a field with cardinal red dugouts sat lit under the night sky, empty and ready, waiting for the first kid to run through the gate in the spring and feel the dirt under their feet and decide maybe, just maybe, that this was the game for them, that this was the game that had always been for them. They just had to know it. If this story stayed with you, I want to hear from you right now. Drop a comment and tell me about someone who used a moment not for themselves, but for something bigger than themselves. Someone who had the microphone and chose to say the true thing instead of the easy thing. I read every single one. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Maybe they're a kid who hasn't found their game yet. Maybe they're a grandfather who remembers when baseball felt like it belonged to everyone. Maybe they're just a person who needs to be reminded that the moments we're given are worth using. Subscribe and hit the bell so you're here for the next story. Because this channel exists for exactly this, the athletes the world almost missed. The ones carrying histories that deserve to be spoken out loud. Next week, I'm bringing you a story that starts in a rec center in East Baltimore and ends somewhere you won't see coming. Trust me, be here for it. But right now, I keep coming back to this image. A 4-year-old at the center of the biggest stage in midsummer baseball, holding a trophy and choosing consciously, deliberately, with full knowledge of what he was giving up by not just smiling and saying thank you, choosing to say the thing that needed to be said. There's a word for that. And it's not bravery, exactly. Bravery implies that you're afraid and you do it anyway. What Jordan Walker showed was something quieter than that. Something more deliberate. It was inheritance. The thing his grandfather gave him on a porch in South Memphis, sitting on a plastic cooler, watching a Cardinals game on a 12-inch television connected to an extension cord, the understanding that you don't get to the microphone by accident, and when you do get there, you owe a debt to the people who put it in your hands. He paid it, and somewhere in Memphis, in a field lit up against the dark, the grass remembers the names of everyone who played before.